Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, red in the other room means it's on.
Right, no, it's the, if you, what does it say in the upper right-hand corner?
Stop recording.
Then it's on.
Then you're on.
You're on. Good evening, my name is Mary Maslowski. I'm the chairperson of the Historic District and Historical Commission. We are calling to order our meeting of Wednesday, March 16th, 2022. It is 6 p.m. We are located at the small hearing room in Town Hall. According to Mass General Law, anyone who intends to record the meeting must notify the chair. At this time, being that no one in the audience is indicating they're recording the meeting, we will move forward. We're going to start with a roll call. We have Brendan Lowney on the phone.
Here.
Bob Doan.
Present?
Lynn Zells.
Zalazak. Julia Eldridge.
So we have a total of 5 members here this evening, so we have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is to open the public hearing for amendments to Chapter 131 of the Harwich Code Historic Preservation Bylaw, proposed by the HDHC. The proposed amendments include new definitions and classification of administrative and enforcement authority and process. At the proceeding, the HDHC may vote to adopt the proposed amendments subject to further revisions at the hearing and forward to the selectmen requesting that the amendments be placed on the town meeting warrant for adoption. A copy of the text of the proposed amendments may be reviewed in the building department at Town Hall, located at 732 Main Street in Harwich Center. So with us this evening is John Eidman, our town planner. I will open it up to John to please walk us through the lovely changes.
Well, thanks for having me. And I want to apologize first that it's not usually my MO to be so disorganized. And I think I sent Mary a version, and then I actually have another version in your files. I'd heard that the time might be short to provide a warrant article for town meeting, so I wanted to make sure at least that got this process going. And sometimes it's more messy than you'd ideally like it to be. Also, with that notice language, I just want to make clear that I drafted it. I didn't mean it to be presumptuous, but the only way you could act on something if you indeed wanted to move forward is to have that language in the notice. By no means was I suggesting that you had to forward something to the selectmen this evening. What I provided you is a clean copy of the existing Chapter 131, which is the Historic Preservation Bylaw in the town, which deals with both notices of intent for buildings 100 years old or older in the town broadly, and then certificates within the historic district here in Harwich Center. Also provided, the kind of foundation of some of my drafting was working off a prior revision that I believe maybe Mary worked on with Charlene and a former member of yours named Jean Steiner, maybe?
It was
Okay.
really Jean, Bob, and Brendan that did all the work on that.
Okay. So that was my point of departure. I wanted to provide it to you so you at least, and that's in marked up version, so you at least know where I was beginning. And then I've given you kind of a bit of a Christmas tree in my proposed changes, which we will discuss as much as you'd like to discuss. If I'm boring you and you just don't want to go that direction, really just tell me, we don't want to go that direction, we're done, please leave, whatever it is. And I've also given you a clean version of what what the markup is. So before I get into the kind of line by line analysis, I just want to give you an idea of what I was aiming to do here. Even without looking at some more of the kind of policy-based additions you might want to put in Chapter 131, like an extended demolition delay bylaw period, or a concept of demolition by neglect. I looked at this Chapter 131 and just saw some deficiencies just in terms of process, in a better way it could be ordered. So, I don't even really want to get it. It's your policy domain to decide whether you want to move forward with an extended demolition period or demolition by neglect. I don't even really kind of want to opine on those. I've spoken to you about those before. I think there may be some benefits, but there may be some drawbacks to doing that. But my real aim with this document was to really focus on process, administration, clarifying certain aspects, kind of working with the raw material that exists today and just from a process perspective, making it better. And one of the principal changes that were made is there are 2 articles in the bylaw today. The first one deals with the historic district, the other deals with notices of intent to demolish. What I saw I've actually added a 3rd article, because what I saw lacking was a general article that dealt with general provisions, administration, enforcement, that sort of thing. Much of your work here in the historic district takes off from Mass General Laws, Chapter 40C. And unfortunately, 40C is silent as to certain things like enforcement or administration. You're not necessarily bound because of 40C. You also have something that Mary's probably well aware of called home rule authority.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that's not kind of specifically preempted or you can act consistent with that particular law. I think it's more than in your authority to establish specific enforcement provisions. But in my opinion, you want a separate kind of independent article of this bylaw so they apply equally to both Article 1 and Article 2. So you don't kind of, there's not a question of where, what that enforcement applies to or what your administration applies to. So I don't think I'll go through this, but I don't think the amendments are too controversial or complicated. You'll just see a lot of markup because there's a lot of reordering and formatting here. Well, let me jump right in. And please, I'm not just saying this. If it's too much detail for you, if you don't want that detail, just tell me to kind of move on.
So we're working on this one.
Yeah. Yes. So let's start right at the top. 131.1 is it's titled today Historic District and Historical Commission. I haven't just removed all of this. I've actually taken this out and we'll discuss it in Article 3 because that's really where it belongs, because the Historic District and Historical Commission is acting on both aspects of this bylaw, both certificates and notices of intent. That wasn't necessarily clear to me when I looked at it originally, and the HDHC kind of appeared to just deal with certificates in the Historic District.
So I think it's part and parcel of the consolidation when they consolidated
Yeah.
the historic district and the historic commission into one.
But even more to the point, now it applies to both articles.
Correct.
Yeah. So there should be a
Correct.
general section that deals with them. What I've left in and it renumbered is this establishment of historic district. That's obviously central to the jurisdiction here in Harwich Center, which is the sole historic district, at least for now. The other thing I saw lacking, just understand that there will be people who are less knowledgeable than you who come to the town and need to apply for certificates. There's nothing in Article 1 today that tells people if you're going to do construction or alterations in the historic district, you need to get a certificate. And there's actually a variety of different certificates. So what I've done is I've taken language directly out of Chapter 40C and put it in here, what you see, 131.2. Except as are or may be exempted or provided in accordance with Sections 8 or 9 of MGL 40C, no building or structure, yada, yada. It basically says that it's taken right out of 40C, and it basically establishes the jurisdiction and tells people who are coming to you, why they need to apply for a certificate and what broadly is within, your jurisdiction. Of course, they need to still refer to 40C, but I thought this was a fair statement to have in there for people who don't normally deal with the board. The other thing I thought was important here is the mention of the variety of different certificates that are available, may be applied for, issued under 40C. Certificates of appropriateness, non-applicability, or hardship, because the current version of 131 says is certificates of appropriateness. So, even there could legally be a question, are you somehow in your local bylaw saying that you will not issue hardship or non-applicability? Your conduct, clearly hasn't said that because you've issued those from time to time. So this is just making clear that this is picking up those concepts from Chapter 40C. The other, I think, important change here is, for some reason, the board's time to act on an application for certificate was limited. It was halved.
Right.
I see, especially now where you're meeting once a month, that's kind of a problem. So, I put right back in here, it's the 60 days per Chapter 40C. And of course then, because 40C is silent about this, added an express provision about being able to extend that time frame. Where have I done that here? I've done that somewhere. Yeah, the next page. Next page in another subsection, consistent with and pursuant to powers, duties, and authority, the commission is expressly authorized hereunder to enter into agreements with applicants to continue or extend the 60-day time period in which the commission is required to act on applications for certificates. Yeah, so I think that takes care of that issue. And you won't see anything else in this section because I've taken it all and we'll discuss it in the end in Article 3, what I think things were more of kind of an administrative or general nature.
Mm-hmm.
So this section would deal exclusively with your dealings with certificate requests in the historic district. And of course, then you'd have to go to 40C as well. Next section is, I think, the kind of big section on demolition delay, if you will. I have, renamed it. Of course, you can name it as you will, but I thought it was a little reductive to call it, demolition delay bylaw, because it deals with more things than that. It deals with preservation as well. That's really the main point. And to the extent that you want to get into a demolition by neglect, that would be in this section as well, too. So I've taken out this purpose section, and I've called it intent and purpose, 131.3. And I've taken out this first section because I took the version that you worked on before, there were kind of two purpose sections there.
Mm-hmm.
So I've just kind of consolidated them. And I'll get into the definitions later. I've moved the definition section to the general provisions, and I've made them all work so they work for both articles. They were just in this section, but of course there should be a definitional section for the entire bylaw. There was a term used, preferably preserved, because I think some of these thoughts were taken from other towns, though preferably preserved wasn't really a significant concept to make your decisions. It was just why define. The only time it was used was in this purpose section. And why define it? Because when we get into the meat and bones, it's not a legal standard that you're going to be relying on.
Understood.
Yeah. Feel free to ask questions about that, but I think there's other stuff to deal with. I took the hook. One thing I did add here that I thought was important, because in my time at the Cape Cod Commission, I saw this was confusing. We don't have a lot of individually listed national or state register properties in the town of Harwich, but to the extent that there's ever a proposed, quote, substantial alteration, which is a defined term in the Cape Cod Commission Act, or demolition, which is another defined term, the Cape Cod Commission has jurisdiction over both of those things. So those are things, to the extent you have a National Register property that comes before you for demolition or substantial alteration, you kind of need to know enough, and people who come before you need to know enough, that in some cases that's an automatic referral over to the Cape Cod Commission.
And that would be our role to actually make that referral.
Yes.
Would be required to.
Yeah, technically you actually provide your vote to the building commissioner. The building commissioner refers it. But I've seen in other towns with more singly listed register properties that this is missed. The board doesn't realize it has this jurisdiction, and it only acts under its demolition delay authority. But actually the jurisdiction is much broader than. And of course, going forward in the future, there could be more individually listed registered properties in the town of Harwich. The Cape Cod Commission doesn't have jurisdiction over registered properties in a 40C historic district. The thinking was that a local board already has full jurisdiction over that, so there needn't be some regional jurisdiction.
So for example, in this historic district.
It's also a National Register district.
So it's our authority, not
Correct.
not something that has to be bounced.
Correct.
Whereas if it's a house outside the district, it would not be within our purview because it's the National Register gets kicked to Cape Cod Commission, and we don't have the authority because it's not in a larger defined historic district within the town.
You would have authority ultimately perhaps under your demolition delay authority, but let's take the Chase Library.
Yep.
So if somebody were proposing to demolish the Chase Library, fully just raze it to the ground, that's an automatic referral to the Cape Cod Commission
Okay.
as a development of regional impact.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, a substantial alteration is, and I don't want to get too into the weeds because we don't have a lot of National Register properties, but that's a fact determination that has to be made. The definition is alteration to a listed registered property that jeopardizes the property's continued listing as a contributing property. So that's a
Understood.
fact determination that would have to be made. But a full demolition where you're just proposing to raise it to the ground is an automatic referral to the Cape Cod
Okay.
Commission. So I think it's important to just recognize that locally, because I've seen other HDCs run into an issue with that, even recognizing that jurisdiction. So that's a long explanation for why that is in there.
That's helpful, though.
No, that's a good explanation.
Okay, well, good. The definitions I haven't eliminated, again, they're in Article 3, and we'll talk about that. 1/3, now getting to the notice of intent to demolish section. One thing that I've added in here, which I think is significant in the first sentence, is you tell me if this is what you want. But I think there's been some confusion to this to date. As the 131 reads today, if you are demolishing a building that's over 100 years old, irrespective of whether it is in the district or not, you need to apply technically for both a notice of intent and a certificate of appropriateness. Is that something you want? Because theoretically, you can control demolition absolutely for a building within the historic district. So do you also want them to be applying for a notice of, because the way I've drafted this is, it's before a building in the town located outside the historic district. So it wouldn't, if you're in the historic district, it's presumed that you have the authority to, if you make certain findings, absolutely prohibit demolition, not just impose a delay.
So I think as a practical standpoint, I don't recall us doing both in the district. We have typically required a certificate of appropriateness in the district for whatever they were going to do, and that would naturally cover whatever demolition was a part of the work proposed. I don't recall us requiring, in the years that I've been on the board, and Bob, you've certainly been on it longer than I have, I don't remember us doing both.
It probably
We've-
codifies your practice then.
We've had people who have wanted to come in for a certificate of non-applicability and have filed both a certificate of appropriateness and a certificate of non-applicability. But I don't think we've ever had the certificate of appropriateness and the notice of intent. So I think that probably makes sense for us.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused.
Okay,
Because in the historic district, the way we're written up now, can we prevent a structure from being demolished?
absolutely.
As a
Yeah.
part of the
Is- is-
certificate of appropriateness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we
I
could-
never understood reading it that we explicitly had that capability. Now, and we can stop even a modification and add on to the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
In the historic district.
yeah,
Historic district.
absolutely. Demolition is defined as a type of alteration under Chapter 40C. So yes, you can do that. Now, I think 40C requires, and I'd be happy to come in at some other time to go over 40C with you. It requires you to make certain findings. It's not a casual, I don't think any denial is casual. But it requires you to basically find that demolition would be inconsistent with the purpose of the district. So you should be looking at more significant buildings that ties in, that building ties the district together. But it can absolutely be done. So my thinking is that where you have that authority, why do you need to have that lesser authority of just imposing a delay?
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. thank
So that was the thinking.
And it seems to make more sense, correct me if I'm wrong, to have one authority rather than to have it in two separate places and then have the confusion or the argument as to why we went with one versus another.
The only benefit I can think of doing both is you could conceivably, deny a demolition. And it's not like zoning where someone is prohibited from coming back for a 2-year period unless they go through certain procedures. They can file for that same demolition
Tomorrow.
the next month. I guess what a demolition delay would do theoretically is if you foresee someone coming in and pestering you with those sort of applications, you could just say, no, there's going to be a delay for X period. But of course, at the end of the delay, you still want your jurisdiction to maybe say no again. So then you get into maybe a legal quandary of, because the way the demolition delay is worded is after it's done, then someone can demolish the building.
Right.
And that's not necessarily true in the historic district. So for whatever minimal delay benefit there might be, I would say it's just not worth kind of commingling those things. Yeah. And again, I'm sorry for the long explanation, but some of this stuff
No,
gets
it's very
complicated.
helpful.
I don't think there's any other substantial change there in that section A. I just tried to, I think the word before was used a couple times and it read kind of a little awkward, so I tried to, as readable as any of this stuff can be. I tried to make it a little more readable. I've also added this B in. There was already something like this in there as part of the revisions, but I've tried to spell it out a little more, and it reads, if a building or any portion thereof is of unknown or unascertained age, but its construction appearance or history suggests that it is at least 100 years old, then the commission may presume, and that's an important term, that the building in its entirety is at least 100 years old for purposes of this article. There was some language in there originally that just says, if the building is unknown age, we will treat it as, I'm not sure that's necessarily fair. But again, if its construction history suggests that it is, then there's a presumption. Because the reason you always have these hearings on these notices of intent is there's this presumption and you allow someone to come in and give you other evidence. Doesn't need to change, you don't need to change the presumption. But if you weren't going to have a presumption, there's no reason to have these hearings. If you're just going to say you're on a list, you're significant and you're just here so we can decide how long the delay is going to be. You basically have to give someone the forum. So I think this probably, without changing your intent, I think this maybe gets more to your intent if I'm.
And
okay.
I think it's also codifying our practice. We've had probably 10 or so that we've had people come in and say, hey, my building's not 100 years old. Perfect example was the assessor's records for Cranberry Cleaners down on Doan. Was listed as 18-something. It was clearly a keystroke error on the card. So they came in, we've had people come in and say, the people.
There was
that-
something there. It wasn't that building.
Right, and then we had this similar situation with the folks that owned the Sword and Shields, that building on Schoolhouse.
Yeah.
That was listed as 1915 because it looked like a kid house from Sears Roebuck, but it clearly the deeds showed that there was a sale of land and then a mortgage with the land and the properties thereon. So in the 1940s. So we've taken votes to kind of acknowledge that those haven't been. So this, I think, codifies what our practice has been. So I think that's good as well.
And the other kind of little nuance here is the way I've worded it, if a building or any portion thereof is unknown. So the entire thing will be assumed to be 100 years old. If someone comes in and they just say, well, some portion of it isn't, that gives you the authority to say, okay, you can get rid of that piece. But so trying to think through the full issue there.
And again, what we've been doing, like with garages and things like that. So that's great.
Okay. One thing, in the revised draft I got, there were all these kind of application requirements in there. I would kind of strongly suggest that not be done because you may want to kind of be more agile in what you take away or add to your application materials. And if it's in a bylaw, you have to go to town meeting to change that. So the normal way you will do that is you'll look at your application forms with your attachments and you'll vote, and all it takes is a vote at a meeting like this to change the form. So I would take those specific things out. And I think I gave to Patty what I would style as an attachment to add to the forms today, and it has these very things on it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what CPC does.
Exactly.
They change it every year.
Yeah, yeah. And now I think the best way to go about it, even though it's probably not absolutely necessary, is a public hearing, because then you give people input, but I don't think that's a huge lift to notice that. I don't think there's anything else really significant, so I'll turn to the next page. We discussed this a little bit one of the last times I was with you, in 131.5, public hearing. I think what you would prefer to do, and I agree with this, is if there's a question, just impose the delay, and then that period allows you to negotiate and talk about things. But there may be the rare instance where you really think you're close to getting somewhere with them, and maybe you can extend your 45-day period of review. So I have expressly added in here the time period, this 45 days from filing to making your decision, may be extended or continued by agreement of the applicant. So that just gives you another tool, but you have to balance that against just imposing the delay, which allows you to do the same thing, have that discussion.
Is the 45 days right, or should that be longer? We get caught up in that occasionally.
Yeah, I think what you should do is try to index it to how you actually meet. 45 days is really short.
Yeah.
And remember, this section is not derived from 40C. It's under Home Rule authority. Yeah, so there's no statute that will tell you it has to be 45 or 60. Yeah, I mean, I might make it, 60, and then, the reason for it is you can just say, well, it is the same as certificates.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then our publication requirements are always what trips us up, right? Because
Yeah.
we give people a deadline, and then we're at the 43rd day when we're meeting. So yeah, maybe we should change that to 60.
And, I think sometimes someone who wants to rail against regulations will misinterpret that, and they say, well, you're necessarily going to take 60 days. Well, maybe not.
No, right.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a good suggestion to change that to 60 days. In the next section, I took out, I suggest, I don't know what the purpose is to share something with the Conservation Commission. I don't want to step on your toes, but, after the board will give notice to the planning board of the town, the historic or how does this go? Notice is given to a variety of boards of the hearing, and includes the Conservation Commission. So I don't know why you would include the Conservation Commission in that. So I would suggest taking that out. The planning board makes sense to me, but I don't know why you would give it to the Conservation Commission. I guess the selectmen can stay in there. I just don't see any rational basis to provide notice to the Conservation Commission on this matter. So I would suggest taking that out. And the other aspect I took out is notice to, quote, such other persons as the commission may determine. The problem with that is you haven't yet seen the application,
Right.
so you don't know who those people are. So I think just logically that probably should come out. And then there's really no, I think, significant change in the next section, determination of non-significance. Then the next section, determination of significance, demolition delay. Again, I don't think there's any major things there. And moving on to the next page. This was a new addition, and I've kind of wordsmithed this a little bit. This is that demolition inspection. Mary and I have talked about this a little bit, and I admit it's a good idea, given some of the past problems of doing more you condition your not imposing a delay on a certain amount of demolition work, and then that demolition work exceeds really what you've approved. So I think it's a good idea to have this demolition inspection here. And throughout, I have changed the word building inspector to building official, because building official is the term that's used kind of throughout the town. as the official term and includes both a local inspector and the building commissioner. And I've also included that as a defined term in Article
Okay.
3. So that's changed throughout. And this just creates a logical, process of the building official reviewing the demolition work prior to commencement of subsequent work or issuing a building permit for the same, to ensure that demolition is within the scope of the permit. The better idea is just, at some time it might be great to have the building commissioner come in if he's willing to. There's nothing like forming that relationship, And there was really nothing I changed in demolition. Well, actually, I did add one thing, and I didn't add a lot in there because that's a policy decision you have to make. I'll state my opinion about that again. I'm not, and I spoke to George Meservey in Orleans. He said they've never used it. This is a belt and suspenders thing. The building commissioner already has this inherent authority under the building code for all buildings, historic or otherwise. So if you want to add it in, I think that's your prerogative to do so. The section I added in here is just to make clear that basically, if you are to adopt this demolition by neglect concept, that people can't allow neglect to occur during the demolition period that you impose. Yeah, so that's just, what I've added to the extent that you want to, pursue this.
Can you go back up one thing though, on the previous demolition inspection?
Oh, yeah.
And the violations and penalties you've crossed out, is that somewhere else now?
It is.
Okay.
The other thing I've added to the general section is a general section that deals with everything in this bylaw about violations, enforcement, administration. So, yeah, that's, and I think fairly, that's kind of what I worked on most. In my section too, I have highlighted all these sections that deal with demolition by neglect. The other comment I'll make about demolition by I think there's enough housekeeping stuff to change in here and stuff that really should change. Sometimes you strategically approach how you might put something into town meeting. Is it better to get the housekeeping stuff done and then in a subsequent year deal with the things that might be more controversial, like a protracted demolition delay period or demolition by neglect? Inasmuch as you could always sever those things by way of an amendment during town meeting, even with a great moderator we have who's willing to help people, it gets so complicated at that point that it's usually an all or nothing principle.
So, explain that we really kind of are already covered. In
Yeah.
what respect? Because we have certainly not seen a proactive stance in the past.
Well, I think that's where, and it was I think apropos my discussion about getting a good relationship with the building
Right.
commissioner, because that's where it works. Having a line of communication and being in agreement about what relative jurisdiction is. I've spoken with the building commissioner about this, and he said, absolutely, they just have to give me a buzz, and I will, go out. Now, he has to act under color of health or safety.
Right, yeah.
But if it's getting to that point, I think that takes care of your issue as well.
And it's really a matter of him being able to make sure the building's boarded up and protected from the elements so that the neglect doesn't continue.
Yeah, now I think the irony could be you're going to have a very non-historic blue tarp likely over the building. Yeah, but it's,
We're losing it.
exactly, what it does is that you're really trying to protect the structure. Not even the finished materials, but the structure.
A lot of people do ask us about this,
Mhm.
about what can we do to stop this. I'm just not sure we have enough in the background, because, the good example is the Bishop's Terrace in West Harwich. There's a big hole in the side of one of the things, and that should be covered over. Is that in the jurisdiction? To me, that's a safety issue.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
is that in the jurisdiction of the building?
Well, you could certainly begin a discussion with him about that. You think, of course you have a particular interest in it, but from a broader perspective, it also raises health and safety issues. I don't think that has ever been done, certainly not with the building commissioner there is now.
Right.
Yeah.
They did put their emblem up there, do not.
For the fire, it's for the fire department.
Exactly.
And, one of the things we did ask them is to always notify when they do that, because they could do a building we don't even aware of, and I don't think that's ever been done yet,
Yeah.
that we've been notified, because I saw another building get one that was well past due, but it's not being covered up, I mean, the roof's open.
So I do think there is a second issue, right? Every time the town boards up a building, the town incurs costs.
Yeah,
And I have seen those costs get added to the tax title account, and as kind of a fine or a penalty. I'm not sure whether, I don't recall whether that was a special act to get that done, or whether it was just done as part of a 41D ticketing scheme. So that's the only piece that I think would help close the loop on that, because I think the town as a whole would be more apt to take that action and incur that expense if there's some means of recovering it on a tax bill or on a tax title account later on.
Yeah. Well, that also speaks to this demolition by neglect, because remember, what you're doing is you're telling somebody who's already probably recalcitrant
Mm-hmm.
right.
that now you have to go do something. So
Right.
this doesn't envision that the town will go out and do something.
Right.
You're telling somebody you have to go do something.
Right.
And I guess the control you have is violations per day. That's where you might have some people who read deeply into this who object to this.
Right.
Because they say, once the HDHC says you need to go, this is being neglected. And I think the triggering language is even says something like, when it comes to the attention of the HDHC. So it's not exactly what you normally find in legal language. If you happen upon this, that can actually start a process then where you tell somebody they have to close up a building, they don't do it, they can start getting fined for that. And it's a fine of, $100 a day. So that's where I see somebody maybe saying, wait a second here,
Right. Which I do think we have plenty of, there should be a way to allow the building inspector to be the enforcing officer on those kinds of issues.
And having the town take the remedial action. perhaps,
Correct.
With
And
cost
then-
recovery.
Right, and then you have, the dollar, it's the 100, usually it's, 50, 100, 200, 300, whatever. Your maximum per diem is under 21D. And then, presumably can recover at least some portion of it
Mhm.
on a tax title or through a foreclosure.
Yeah, I'll try to ask more about that. I don't know off the top of my head. The other kind of repercussion of demolition by neglect is some people may raise the issue that there is this process. If someone voluntarily comes to you and says, I want to demolish, basically you can only impose a delay. But this demolition by neglect act exists forever. And there's a different kind of violation and penalty scheme for that, where someone acts voluntarily. So there's actually less penalty for someone who comes voluntarily. So is that going to encourage people to come forward for voluntary demolitions?
Yeah, but doesn't it, the way it's written, that if they come to us and say that we want to demolish it, we're going to say the reason why it has to be demolished is because it was neglected, not because maybe historically significant or something. Then that's the penalty of doing that, is you have to wait 2 years instead of 1 year or whatever.
Well, right, but for some people, they would rather wait, than get caught up in this demolition by neglect. I'm not trying to sell you one way or the other, I'm just trying to raise potential issues. It's ultimately a policy decision that's in your discretion. So it's not my job to meddle with that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I do agree that it's very controversial, and I accept, or like your idea that let's get it cleaned up first and then delay a year. I don't have a problem with that. At least if we can get the 18 months in at this point, which is,
Yeah.
I don't think, unreasonable.
No,
Other towns are now adopting it. so.
yeah.
Can I ask a question though, on
Yeah.
take Bishop's Terrace for an example?
Yeah,
It's a significant property.
very.
It's just sitting there, falling apart, and can we not do anything?
So I think if I understood what John said,
Right, I just wanna make sure.
the
I
building inspector could make it safe, or order order something be done based on his authority under the health and safety, is preserving the health and safety under the building code,
If
correct?
he determines that its condition is a threat to health and safety, right, he could require certain, that it be essentially closed in.
Right.
So we could request an inspection of the property.
Yeah,
We would have the authority to do that. That's all I'm
And
asking.
effectively, they've already done that because they put up the sign not to enter for the fire. Isn't that kind of the same or not?
well, I think really what we're getting at is, like, I wasn't being totally facetious when I talked about a blue tarp.
Mhm.
Like, it may be
That's
closing
literally what
in
they
the
could do.
building to the weather.
Right.
And sometimes it even, again, you have to put up with some things to get your ultimate goal. There could be a temporary ugly fence like this one over here that goes up.
And at the same time, the building inspector could go in and make the determination that needs to be demolished too. I mean, I
Well,
think
that's
we,
happened to us. They
we.
did that to us.
Right.
And didn't even come to us, they just
Right.
demolished.
Well, we have some of that in here now. We'll try to
So-
fix, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like the old Captain Baker House
Yeah.
down by the Baptist Church, I think it's Captain Baker
Oh, yeah.
House. There's new broken windows there, and that's been marked,
Mhm.
so.
They
something
did
needs to be
put
done
plywood
with
on the first level, I
Yeah,
believe.
but now on the second level, somebody's decided to play games with the windows.
Yeah.
Well, I've told Mary this before, so I'll just put it right out there. I kind of, the ideal situation in my mind for what the Cape Cod Commission did with West Harwich would have been another historic district. Because what you find in the zoning now, it attempts and purports to do something it really can't do, which is to prevent his significant historic structures from demolition. So you can try to incentivize it, but you can't prohibit it. You can prohibit that in a historic district. You don't necessarily get to the demolition by neglect issue. But the kind of optimist in me says that once you have an historic district and people see its value, it's the market itself that will prohibit the demolition because people won't want to let properties get to that state because there's a market value in them.
And really, the DCPC in West Harwich really was driven by the neighbors
Right.
because they were trying to prevent the Dollar General.
Right.
Eastham had been successful in keeping out Dollar General through a DCPC, so that's what kind of drove the whole
Right.
process.
But
But-
it should be done as a historic district.
Mhm.
Yes.
And I
I-
think there's momentum in the town for it too.
Mhm.
I wish it had been done instead because the zoning is very difficult to understand. If it had just, the most direct way to have addressed those issues would have been to do an historic district during the moratorium period that's offered by the DCPC. I wish that had been the direction. And then there could have been some simple zoning about some dimensional, in your villages, you want closer setback. You don't want a 40-foot setback, you want a 20-foot setback. So there could have been some very simple dimensional changes like
Well,
that.
Can't we still do it?
You can do an historic district. I'm just saying there was so much effort to put into it.
Right.
And it was a little bit like, I don't want to be too pejorative, but kind of a wasted effort. Because really, if you were trying to preserve historic structures, the best way to do it is a 40C district.
Okay.
Reversing the district, I mean, maybe we should put that as an agenda item for
I
a
think
future
we
meeting,
should.
whether that's something that, because I'm presuming that would take more applications through the Cape Cod Commission to attempt to.
You don't have to go through the Cape Cod, the Cape Cod Commission could help. but
As
the-
far, I just meant, would it be a historic district plus reversing the DCPC?
Yeah, I
Or
think-
leave the DCPC in place and add a historic district to it?
When you amend zoning done through a DCPC in the moratorium period, you actually have to apply, the Cape Cod Commission, as well as town meeting,
Yeah.
has to approve those zoning amendments.
Gotcha.
If an historic district were proposed, of course, the town has its independent authority, and there's a process under 40C, which the town went through in 1972? Something like that, to do this historic district. Yeah, and you have to do studies the same way that you, yeah.
So maybe we should agenda that for a future
We
meeting.
really
Yes.
should.
So
Yeah.
we'll add that to the list.
So getting really, I think, to what I focused on most is this new Article 3, which is, I've just called simply general provisions. And the first thing is dealing with this 13112 Historic District and Historical Commission. I noticed that there was a disconnect between the charter, the committee bylaw, in the code and this, because this cited that there were 7 members. There aren't 7 members. So you actually, it's better to just take out that membership if you're going to address it in another bylaw or the charter. So I've done that and said that membership is per Chapter 40C, the town charter, and Chapter 7 of the Harwich Code. The charter allows a certain amount of members. That bylaw provision in the code, Chapter 7, fixes the number of members, and it's fixed now at 5 currently.
It's not.
It's not?
No. Well, we haven't been operating that way because we have, I thought we were more than 5.
Well, not alternates, but 5 regulars.
We had, because we were 7,
Right,
Okay.
because our quorum is 4.
right.
Okay, I think, I'll check that. The charter says up to 7. I think the bylaw might say 5, but I'll check that.
Okay.
But at any rate, you don't really.
And we could be wrong. I mean, I wouldn't put it past us, our practice being somewhat incorrect, because I believe we were a 7-member board with 4 alternates.
Yeah, I don't-
2 or 4 alternates.
Well, I guess if you are indeed a 7-member board, then remember your majority is 4.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
So, and we typically were operating with, for quite a long time. This is the first stretch where we've had 5 regular people showing
Okay.
up.
Well, let me
So-
check that for you, but at any rate, it's probably best to just refer to it in general, because those are the proper 4 in the town
Yep.
to set the number of members.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then I've left the language in about having, representative members from other competencies.
Mhm.
I've added this in, powers and duties of the commission. The historic district, and I think this said something like this in the first section originally, but the historic district and historical commission shall have all the powers and duties of historic district commissions and historical commissions, because historical commissions are mentioned in 40C, as provided by the Historic Districts Act, MGL Chapter 40C, and subsequent amendments thereto, as well as those powers and authority, and this is the new section, reserved or afforded under the Home Rule Amendment to the Massachusetts Constitution, to the extent such power and authority are not in conflict with said Chapter 40C. So that's kind of the language you want.
Where are you?
I'm sorry,
Page
Article
7.
3.
3.
Yeah.
Actually, our
Page 7.
bottom.
I just read from 131:13.
Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize for that. So this just recites home rule authority is really how you're doing things like your demolition delay bylaw. Yeah. And then there's this administration section, and it's not absolutely necessary, but I think it's helpful to recite some of the kind of authority you have under 40C. And the commission may adopt such rules and regulations as are necessary to administer the terms of this chapter. The commission may maintain and amend from time to time application and other administrative forms. The commission is authorized to adopt a schedule of reasonable fees to cover the costs associated with the administration of the chapter. The commission may delegate authority to make initial determinations of significance to one or more members of the commission or to a, and I put in the word qualified here, qualified municipal employee. The commission, and I added this in because you're doing it already, the commission shall maintain a list or inventory of historically significant buildings and properties. The commission may add or include buildings or properties to the inventory, but only following a public hearing and deliberation and vote by the commission. The commission, and this is something new that comes from 40C of sections 8 and 9 of 40C. The commission may adopt and amend from time to time after public hearing a list of activities, uses, or construction that are presumptively deemed to be appropriate in the historic district and thus are not subject to the commission's review in the historic district, or matters that are exempt from the commission's review in said district pursuant to sections 8 and 9. So that is to say, what section 8 and 9 allow you to do is to say a certain type of fence is okay without a hearing. White paint is okay without a hearing. And you could do this without amending your bylaw. The 40C provides that you have to do it in public, But you can do a bulletin, you can do a policy, and you can just maintain that form from time to time. And you can tell people, if you use, this type of wood shingle or this type of architectural roof shingle, that's okay. And you can get as detailed or as general as you want. You can, CertainTeed brand architectural shingle, this color. But it gives you, I think it gives you a lot of flexibility to, if you find you end up reviewing a lot of things and getting people in here to apply for things that you say, well, that would, it's kind of silly you're here, but you have to go through the process. You can essentially give that authority to an administrative official in the town and say, you can review this and you can approve it so long as it fits in these parameters that the board has established for, say, paint or types of construction or types of structures.
So if, for example, we put in, you could have replacement windows with wooden slats on the exterior or whatever, then like the apartments next door, instead of coming to us to get approval on the individual ones he picked, he could have picked from a list and said.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
and you can get as specific as you want. Some historic commissions maintain kind of very specific lists of window manufacturers and types, or it can be more general, like white paint. I know white paint doesn't come to you, but
Right.
theoretically it should.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't mean to push you on anything, but temporary structures are something specifically called out in 40C that you can exempt. Now, that's a very ugly fence out there, but sometimes it comes down to how much do you want to have to fight about things. Sometimes it's better to focus on things that are right in the bullseye of your jurisdiction than fight about things out on the periphery. How much do you want to fight in 2022 about asphalt pavement when it's kind of a fait accompli? And the other thing is you're establishing your jurisdiction. It's not saying you don't have jurisdiction. You're just saying, that guy in that office can issue the permit for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's something to think about. Yeah.
Would you list like on our website, like the items, or would they have a list in the building department?
I think it would be any and every place where someone might look. You would want to take it up at a meeting. You would want to vote on these things. And then the building commissioner would maintain it in his office. You would put it on the website. It would be in the application form. Yeah.
It's essentially acting as rules and regulations for us.
Yeah.
Just saying this is okay.
Well, I think it would help out
Right.
homeowners too, because a
Well,
lot of
this
times.
is, yeah,
Gives them a chance to
well,
build.
this is only historic district, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So, and we get very few requests in this
We
historic
do.
district.
We
and
don't.
It's not a burden for either parties. The only thing occasionally is someone wants to repaint the same color,
Mm-hmm.
that should be a no-brainer.
Mm.
Yeah, since my time at the town, there has been a policy that like for like can be approved by the building commissioner. That's something that probably would be better codified
Right.
in your this policy statement.
Well, but like for like too, if you've got vinyl windows in a brick building across the street, that's certainly not a historic structure, but is in the historic district, by saying you're okay with wood windows, then they wouldn't have to come to us, right? Maybe you get a better quality of what you're allowing in a historic district.
Yeah, well, that too, and that could be another option than just, I guess there have been certain things done in the historic district that, this particular composition of members wouldn't have allowed, but some other composition did, but you live with those things.
Mhm.
And so, like for like seems reasonable, but be very specific about it, because 40C is specific about it. It's the absolute same color, absolute same material, absolute same design. Yeah. So I'd be happy to work on that moving forward with you. And this just references that authority. This
Yep.
doesn't give you that authority.
Right.
And I think it's helpful to people who might deal with you, what, your things you might be involved with. This also just cites kind of a legal truism, but it's good to put people on notice. The commission may, from time to time, consistent with and pursuant to MGL Chapter 40C, enlarge, modify, or contract an historic district or adopt a new historic district.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. And that, there's a process for doing that in 40C. And actually, there's different processes for contracting a district versus expanding it and that sort of thing, yeah. And this is something new. Any certificate or determination issued by the commission under this chapter shall run with the subject property and be valid and effective and may be exercised by the owner or applicant within 2 years of issuance. So currently, there's nothing in 40C, and there's nothing currently either in Article 1 or 2 that tells people, even with a certificate, they get it. Is it good forever? If they don't exercise it? There should be a time frame on it.
So there's no time frame
No.
right now.
No, and that's why I think the board in the past has gotten into kind of difficult discussions and even reached out to town council to ask, what's the distinction between an applicant and an owner? And you avoid all of that if you just say it runs with the property, it's appurtenant to the property, and it's good for 2 years.
And very similar to a special permit would,
Yeah,
that if it's not substantially exercised, you lose it.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
makes sense to be consistent.
yeah. And this provides for an extension as well. And then again, it's your discretion whether to grant that. But I think I think that takes care of a lot of kind of issues I've heard surrounding some of the certificates and notice of
Absolutely.
intent. So, and this is the definition section, and I've changed a few words here and there so that these definitions would apply and make sense with both articles. So an applicant, it's, there's a reference to a determination, certificate, or permit. And I've added in here, if the applicant is not the owner of the subject premises, the applicant must provide their legal standing to so apply, including as applicable, that the owner must indicate in the application they're sent to the filing of the application. There's a definition of building here. Building is important, especially in Article 2, because understand your jurisdiction isn't about the demolition of any structure over 100 years old. It's building over 100 years old.
It's not a fence.
It's not a fence, and
Not
it's
a
not an
stone wall.
obelisk or something
Right.
like that. Yeah, it deals with buildings. A building official is the term used here, and it can include a building commissioner or someone otherwise authorized to issue demolition. We should probably put in here, or other building permits, if this applies broadly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Certificate is defined as a certificate of appropriateness, hardship, or non-applicability. The reason commission could be used so liberally throughout this is it's defined inclusive of the Historic District Commission and the Historical Commission. One of I think the most important things that can be done here is to adopt the definition for demolition. So in the revisions I saw, there was a definition. It was a definition of demolition that's used by most communities. I have changed it a little bit here, and I'm suggesting that it should be limited to, for purposes of Article 2 herein. Because for purposes of Article 1, Chapter C already defines what a demolition is. And it's really any change in an exterior architectural feature. I've tried to, I've looked at this demolition definition before as other communities have used it. It's always been a little confusing to me, so I've tried to clarify it here, and so it reads, any act of pulling down, destroying, removing, dismantling, or raising a building, parentheses, or commencement of the same, with the intent of total or substantial destruction of the building, or removal of the building from its current site. So I think that's an important part too. You may end up approving that, but you don't have to, because it's tantamount to a demolition, because the setting is sometimes as important. Understand here too, this, I hope it's your intent, but right now, the building commissioner is stuck with a difficult job sometimes of not having a definition of demolition. So there's nothing that guides him about what demolition is. So you have to kind of fashion your own rule yourself about, what's the intent behind the demolition delay bylaw, and I'll try to fashion my own demolition definition. So usually, the definition we've been using now is, well, is structure being removed? Not, because roofing materials can come and go, even siding materials can come and go, but is the structure being removed? What this makes clear is somebody is looking to basically completely demolish the building, or demolish so much of it that it's tantamount to a full demolition. I know there's an attraction to kind of keeping as much jurisdiction as you can for demolition delay, but there's also an element of understanding clearly what that is for, and really the principal purpose of it is when someone is looking to completely take that building off the site. Yeah, it's not, it read another way, it's not a way to get around, it's not another way to have design review outside the historic district. Because that's what it could be if you're basically just saying, you're taking this little tiny bit of the building off, we're gonna treat that as demolition, and then you get into basically a design review of what's being proposed. If you want that, there's a process to do it, and it's called establishing an historic district. So that's my thinking, but just understand that I think it's really important to have a definition of demolition, but just make sure that it's your intent, what it says. Because if you want to have jurisdiction over something less than substantial or total demolition or removal, this doesn't afford you that.
So we have, in the past, taken the tact to act conservatively because there was no definition. So, for example, in Ocean Grove, there was a house that was they were putting on an addition, and what they were doing was cutting a hole in the wall to make a door from a garage, I think, in, and we required them. that
Right,
they
you would
come before
lose that
us.
if you want that jurisdiction, you would lose that jurisdiction.
Right. I
Because-
mean, that being said, I don't know that, I took the tact at the time that I didn't think we had an option because of the lack of a definition. But I do think that's extreme in this situation because I think cutting a door and a wall to put an addition onto a house isn't necessarily what the intent of the demo delay bylaw really is.
And what's the alternative?
Right.
Not to put the door in?
So I'm
Right.
confused now.
So
Totally
what,
confused.
Okay.
so
And, yeah,
So that, under this definition, that instance in Ocean Grove, it really wasn't,
It wouldn't come to you.
wouldn't come to us because it was cutting a wall, it was cutting a door in a side wall of the.
It's
the-
not total or substantial
Yeah.
destruction or removal. If you want a different definition, it could be more like zoning's definition. Like say, removal or destruction of 50% or more of the exterior structural materials. That would, or less, whatever it is. But right now, what we are saying internally here is
Yeah.
if somebody is removing any kind of substantial amount of the structure, not the siding or roofing, but if they're cutting in, let's say, a slider door,
right,
we're sending it to you because there's no definition of demolition.
right.
And it seems to us that because they're removing some of the structural materials, they have to because there's wall structure. That, even in, reading things most fairly, that you could, in that situation, I guess, come up with an alternative for, well, I guess you could put in a smaller door.
But what if someone's taking off a wing of a building and going to totally remove it, that's historic, but not the original building or whatever?
You would have to.
Sounds like you're saying that wouldn't come to us.
No, well, it wouldn't unless the building commissioner treats that as total and substantial demolition. So there's probably another way to get, but I think the version I saw before I wordsmithed this, it faced the same problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really getting at how much do you want to look at?
Just curious about thoughts if it was, if the demolition or removal affected the facade of the building
Right.
that was seen from the public way. Because that's typically what we're more worried about.
Right.
So I could see, the place I would foresee the problem is, or it being, this board wanting some comment, is if it was, they were perfect example, we had another one in Ocean Grove. It was a total demolition. And what they did was they copied what another one of the houses did. But essentially, they got rid of the whole historic facade and they made it the side of the building. So from the streetscape, you really lost the historic look of the house. So I wonder if we could tweak it in that if it was demolition that substantially changed the historical facade of it.
Building
Or is it
commissioners
just-
aren't good at determining
Yeah.
design stuff.
Yeah.
What I would then I would add another definition here and say substantial and total destruction is defined as 50% or greater of the structural materials. Because remember, it's not, it's a laudable intent. I understand what you're saying, but it's not a proxy for design review.
Right.
The reason you have demolition delay is so you don't completely eradicate old buildings.
So I get that. I just think that there are some things that if it's on the facade, changing that front door that, in a federal colonial to, something different may substantially kind of ruin that historic structure
Yeah.
for what its historic detail was.
Yeah.
So that's the only piece that gives me a little pause. I completely understand what you're saying, and I get the issue in the building department as well, because you do have to kind of make a decision whether it's demolition or not. And
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the only piece that.
But I guess think of it this way. I understand you want to keep a certain design or look, but would you impose, I think you're on shaky legal ground for imposing a demolition delay because you don't like how the resulting door might look.
Mhm.
It's really to preserve those materials, the structural materials. That's my opinion. I mean, the
Yeah,
board,
yeah.
you have to do what you see
As opposed
fit.
to the facade. You think
Yeah,
we'd
I
have a
wouldn't,
hard time
really
saying
use,
it's,
I would use, I mean, so based on what I'm hearing, if anything, I would add in a definition here, even within the definition, to say, substantial or total destruction shall be defined as removal of 50% or greater of the existing structural materials on the building.
I'm throwing it out there. I'm just playing
Yeah,
devil's advocate.
no, you don't even need to, I mean, I'm just here to
Because
walk you through. I don't
No,
want you
and
to make
I-
decisions because I'm here, I'm not,
No,
pressuring you to.
but this is so helpful to get it to a point where it needs to be. I mean, it clearly, the existing bylaw clearly doesn't do what even we want it to do in a practical standpoint. And I think I'd like to think that we do a pretty good job of trying to be owner friendly. And I understand your point too. You get to if we really want design review, it should be a historic district, right? I mean, then.
Yeah, or have
But-
zoning design review.
Exactly. So.
Because if it's not in a historic district.
Right,
Unless
and that's
you
all,
gotta- yeah.
right, and that's all that these are.
If you're talking
I
about
look at the only place I think of is like that Ocean Grove house comes to mind. But it was a total demolition, and it was just,
So it also, one of the-
if I recall correctly, we imposed the demo delay because of the whole house was being completely changed.
But that probably follows. That's
Right.
that's supportable.
Right.
So, for example, on Bank Street, if one of the old captain's houses on Bank Street, the one captain's quarters, if they took the wraparound porch off, that would just change the entire
Right.
look of it and
We wouldn't have
destroy
a
it.
say.
Well, I think people would lament it, but the question is that really what the demolition delay bylaw is for? Up to
I mean,
you.
that's again the whole idea. Should Bank Street be its own-
Should there be design review, but you can have design review under zoning.
right?
Is that a better way to get it? I just think at some point, you don't get, this is a reasonable board and you don't get challenged with things, but, you could face a legal challenge if you're using demolition delay for
For the wrong thing.
a wrong purpose, design review. Because really, demolition delay is defined by, imposing a delay so you can come up with alternatives. And the alternatives aren't, I like this door rather than this door.
Right.
But again, the policy issues are your domain. You're gonna have to decide on those things.
So,
I definitely think we should have a 50%.
as opposed to the total?
I really do. Now, is that 50% of the historical proportion of the building or 50% of the building?
No, I think it should just be 50% of the existing structural materials of the building. So then it brings the jurisdiction to you and you can decide. Remember, this is just about whether or not this is going to come to you at all.
Now, when I'm thinking of the case where you say 50% is your thing, well, all the houses almost always have additions all over the
Right.
place. So someone will come and say, well, I want to get rid of the historical part, yet the whole building is, it's only 40% of the whole area. And they can do it. We've had that a lot. People are always saying, well, I just don't want the store because the ceilings are too low and, all the million
Can we
reasons.
make it 25%?
You can make it any percentage you want. Yeah, it's just better you just have to come up with a definition for demolition. Yeah.
I mean, you also don't want it too small that it defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah,
then
then you just
everything's
bring
coming
everything
to
in
anyway.
again.
Right.
Which just
Well-
defeats the purpose of,
Well, it is now, effectively.
right, exactly.
We're not exactly
it-
overburdened. But some of it is very obvious.
Some of it is obvious that shouldn't have had to come to
Come
us,
to
but
us.
we've taken the position that it does. So I think that's food for thought. I also, thinking about how that's gonna be thought on a town meeting floor too that's another definition to just kind of consider. Because again, I look at, in planning board, the other night, we looked at the kind of some of the design guidelines for the DCPC, right? And if, if you were talking about those new additions being the 50%, you wouldn't care. You wouldn't care that was the 50% if it was the new
Right.
addition that's hidden from the street
Right,
because you're worrying about the facade.
right.
But then to John's point, if you're worrying about the facade, then we're really talking about a historic district. Because that's what we do in a historic district, is we worry about that which we see from the street or the public way or public land. So, yeah, I'm torn. I see both sides.
Yeah, but just understand what he is here and what was in that revised version
Yeah.
I was given. So I'm not just trying to
No,
undercut
it's the
you.
same.
It's basically,
It's the same, yeah.
yeah, it's total or substantial destruction. If it's not that, it doesn't even come to you for demolition away. So that's probably a good note about the implications of adopting that.
I mean, even if we put in 50% or 25%, it actually theoretically is better than it was before, because everybody would have to come just for replacing their windows. And
Yeah,
windows.
right.
So it's still a benefit
Yeah.
to ease up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But could you live with, I think 50% is very reasonable, especially where it kind of aligns with the zoning definition.
Okay.
Once you start to
Yeah.
get below 50% and 25%, people start to look at it and say, what's going on here? You know,
Yeah, okay, I understand
yeah.
that.
So
You
the
just have to
50
realize you can't, all your hearts are in historic preservation. And, it gets different when you get on a board.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, okay, I'd go with 50%. I think it should be there.
And a couple of the ones that we've had have been stuff on the back. of the
Mary,
house.
can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Sure, Brendan.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea, and if there is a defined percent, I think it allows owners and architects, as the word spreads, they'll start designing around that and keep in mind what they can keep and cannot keep. Over the years in construction, we've come across buildings where we always try to keep the facade, and that's always in the forefront. So I think a percent is a very good idea. It's very ambiguous now, but yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
So are you, Brendan, are you kind of along the same lines of the 50% being the right number?
I am having a little bit of a tough time hearing John. I'm getting most of it. I think so. I mean, could you just recap what we have now what do we have now? Is it just any touch of the building?
Yeah,
Yes, it's any touch of the building. So that's why when somebody in Ocean Grove was adding a garage, a two-car garage, because they somehow miraculously had the land to add a two-car garage, they had to come to us to cut the door so that they could cut a door out of a sidewall so that there was a door from the garage into the house.
Yeah,
So-
it's almost similar to the last meeting where there was a door that you
Yeah.
couldn't see
Yeah,
from the
that
street.
Right.
You wanted
exactly,
to put it out and build a deck that you couldn't see.
exactly.
So, yeah, so maybe that would fall under. I mean, it doesn't stop people from being crafty, with that 50%. And how do you define the exact 50%? But
Right.
yeah, I think that might be the number we're talking about, just to ease a little bit and not have people come in front of us for such small tasks. So it does make sense.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks
Okay.
for indulging my comments.
Oh, sure. Can I race through the
Please.
rest here? Okay, so I just see demolition permit here. That's probably important to, again, index to Article 2, because that's when it comes up, so I'll put that in. Historic district is just, defined as the historic district referenced and identified by map in Article 1. Historic Districts Act is MGL Chapter 40C. And then significant building is defined, and just understand, and I've spoken to you about this before last time I was here, how the mechanics of the demolition delay bylaw. Something comes in because a building comes in because it's at least 100 years old, not necessarily that it's significant. Once it comes in here, you determine significance, and you can even rely on presumptions. So one of the presumptions you have today is if it's listed in your inventory, it's presumed to be significant. That's another reason why I think it's important going forward. When you look at your inventory, it shouldn't be seen as the 100-year-old list. It should be seen as the significant building list. In fact, there are buildings less than 100 years old in the town that are significant. And one thing that comes to mind, just telling how things change, is right next to the church in Mike Ford's office, there's the former Little Orleans Auto Parts. And it's important because it starts to tell the story of what happened in West Harwich at a different time. And if you get something on before 100 years, then when it gets to be 100 years old, it's already there for your bylaw to work. But I think really the focus should be in your significant building list, to focus on the buildings that are significant. And there should be a column about the estimated age or the evidence stage. But even if it's not 100 years old, you still might want to put it on. The jurisdiction for demo delay is a building 100 years old. So that comes in, and then you determine its significance. And sometimes there might be presumptions about significance, especially if it's on the inventory list. Now, one thing I added back into this definition for significant, because for some reason I saw it lost, is that it's included on the town's inventory. You want that number 5 to be in there. And for some reason it was taken out in the version I saw, because that's the presumption about significance. It doesn't mean that if there's evidence presented to you, you might find that, well, geez, we didn't know that. The evidence we have is incorrect. But at least it allows someone to move forward, and you're presuming it's significant, and then the burden is on the applicant to show why it's not significant.
So, but, in our list, we have, which is effectively 100, actually, it's not a 100-year list, because there are buildings on it. When I determined how many to be added to go through 22, it turned out a bunch of those were already in the list.
Okay.
And they'd already had a study, an architectural study. But a lot of those, but does that mean we have to, as a group, meet and look at every single property in our inventory and say this is significant or not? I mean,
I wouldn't go backwards.
So, but I think you did that anyway when the study was done and you accepted the list. Presumably,
that is true. Yeah.
presumably you accepted the list and you took a
That's
vote
right.
to adopt that as the list.
Right.
So I think, I think maybe we look at it maybe in a little more detail going forward, but I think
Right.
you did that. I think it's just a matter of time has passed
Yeah.
and.
But the importance is, if it's, it doesn't moot the need to come to the board if it's a building 100 years old and it's on the list. someone, you should still go through your findings and your analysis and give someone the opportunity to provide evidence to you.
Absolutely.
But there is a presumption there. It's their job to say, well, it's on our list. It's your job to tell us why it's not significant. Maybe there's some addition that, you're calling the entire building 1880, but the addition's it's just really done, and it's from 1980. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how you define significant building. There's an enforcement section which would apply to the entire chapter. The building official is authorized to enforce the provisions of this chapter. I dabbled with thinking, well, should this board, I think that's a really hard thing to do, to have a board be the enforcement authority, because how does that practically happen? It kind of ties into a couple statements from 40C2 where a permit can't be issued until a certificate is issued. So that seems to make sense. Violations and penalties. These are basically, some of them were in, I believe, the Article 2 before. Some of these were changes that were proposed before I came along. And then some of them are just taken from the non-criminal disposition bylaw the town has. It also provides for, injunctive authority, injunctive relief, rather than just fining, because that's really the way if somebody goes and does work, they're doing work and they didn't get a certificate, fine them all you want. Really what you're trying to do is have them stop and come back and get approval for what they're doing. Now, this statement, this includes cases that meet the definition of violation by neglect. I've left that in and highlighted just so you could think about, identify whether you want to move forward now with those things or whether you introduce it at some later time or something. Severability is a kind of just standard legal jargon for if there's any particular provision in the bylaw that a court strikes, it doesn't strike the entirety of the bylaw. It just strikes that particular provision. I also thought it was a good section to add in this statement. Section titles and captions herein are used and shall be interpreted for descriptive purposes only, rather than someone reading legal intent into captions and titles. And finally, conflicts with other laws, Historic Districts Act. This is in the existing. If any provisions of this chapter conflict, let me take that S out, with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40C, the Historic Districts Act shall prevail. And that's everything, and I'm sorry, it took a long time. Yeah,
You were very thorough.
yeah.
That's a fantastic rewrite, and really provides us with information that we should have had but didn't. So going forward, that's great. I guess I would ask the board for next step. I think we technically could take a vote tonight, but there are some changes that I think we've talked about. I would be willing to schedule a meeting in 2 weeks if John thought he could turn around some changes, and then we'd have a draft that we could move forward on. I will say my thought is to kind of take John's comment about demolition by neglect into consideration and just remove those provisions at this point. I think in 18 months, if this board still wants to go forward with 18 months, that's a relatively easy fix at town meeting. I think we could make that. If the landscape looks like they don't want to extend it, we could then easily offer up that kind of an amendment from an 18 months to a 12 months.
Just to retain.
To just retain the 12 months that we already have. And I think that would be an easy motion that certainly the moderator is going to accept as being within the scope of the tenant. So, I mean, that being said, does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So if you'd be able to make some of those
Absolutely.
changes, that would be
I'll
fantastic.
make all of those changes.
So if we look at, Brendan, hang on, can you hear us? Brendan?
Yes, I can hear you.
And are you in agreement with what I just said, that if John turns around some changes, we could schedule a meeting in 2 weeks?
Yes, I would be available for that.
All right, so let's see.
It's 30.
Is that the 30th of March? So I would I propose that we schedule a meeting for March 30th at 6 PM. I can call administration tomorrow and see what's available for a location and a time slot. So I will take care of that in the morning,
Okay.
if that works.
I'm going to do the same thing that I did here. I'm going to just keep treating this as track changes, so we have the track changes document. But we've discussed, I'm trying to think of maybe I can ask Elaine to help me how to identify different track changes from one another, but I don't know. I'm not a great
So
word
you can-
processor.
So you can do it by, if you go version to version,
Okay,
what you could do is from this version to the next version, you can do, save your next as a new document. You then track back to this version, and then you can track back to your original. You can also take this version, reject all those changes, keep your original, track back to the original. So then you have cumulative changes, and then you have just from the most
I
recent
might have to
version.
call, I might have to call you on that.
I can handle, just give me if you want to just send them to me, I can actually do that for you.
Okay,
That's pretty, that's
That doesn't
the
sound
contract
very-
lawyer in me, that's what we do all the time. So yeah, you would take your original and you can compare your newest to your original and then your newest to your last. So you would get cumulative changes and then you'd get just from this revision to the next, which this revision to the next would show you deleting the demo delay bylaw and you know, the demolition by neglect and just kind of the references back to Article 2 or Article 1 or whatever. So that's easy enough. I'm happy to,
okay,
you can send those to me and I can flip those for you.
okay.
That works easy enough.
I'll have those.
Would you be willing, if, on that meeting, to come back and do the explanation again?
Oh, yeah, of course.
No, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking that we should maybe
not gonna
make
leave
it a
you-
point to make this a public hearing, that try to get some people to,
So what I would actually, we are in a public hearing right now. I would
I know.
actually propose that we continue the public hearing to
okay. No,
March 30th with the date and time
I'm
certain.
just trying to figure out how we get this communicated out to the community, so they're not blindsided at town meeting.
Yep.
And I
Set up
don't
on the
know how to
website.
do that.
So I think we
We
can,
know we talked about Channel 18 and get some discussion.
so we can also send a note in to be read for public comment at the next selectmen's meeting. You know.
We're working on a,
Right, so that, you know, we plan to discuss it again. We're still working on it. We plan to discuss it again on March 30th.
That would be good.
I know the selectmen took up the warrant this week. It's not finalized yet, and I don't know that they'll be finalized before April 1st, so we probably still have time to be able to do those and get these changes proposed. So I would suggest we just do that and go from there, but
Good idea.
this way it's noticed, it was put on as a public hearing. I don't think it's a general bylaw, so I don't think we have any requirements like a zoning bylaw that somebody has to hold a notice public hearing that's published in the newspaper and all of that, but,
Right.
but it is in our agenda and we certainly can, put out the notice of public comment and probably to the newspaper if we want,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yep.
So that being said, the chair would entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to Wednesday, March 30th, no earlier than 6 PM.
I'll move that.
So Mr. Doan makes the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Julie Eldridge has a second. Roll call vote. Julie Eldridge.
Yes.
Lynn Zalasek.
Yes.
Brendan Lowney.
Aye.
Bob Doan.
Aye.
And the chair votes in the affirmative as well. So we have continued the public hearing to Wednesday, March 30th. I thank you very much, Mr. Eidman, for all of your
Sure.
hard work and your input and your continued attendance.
Sure. I do want to stick around for I do have a comment on the inventory list.
Okay?
Yeah, so,
All right.
a new development, a good one, I think, potentially.
Okay, so the next matter on our agenda is approving the minutes for January 19th and February 16th. Is there a motion to approve those, or does anybody have any questions or comments or changes?
I move to approve the minutes from January 19th and February 16th.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Doan is seconded. Roll call vote. Bob Doan.
Aye.
Brendan Lowney.
Aye.
Lynn Zalasek.
Aye.
And Julie Eldridge.
Aye.
And the chair votes in the affirmative. So the next item is old business, the proposed property study of additional historic properties to inventory. Bob at the last meeting had given us kind of a list of some potential properties and asked the board to take a look at them and see if there were still historic properties on those locations. The chair admits freely that she did not do her homework and still has to complete her homework. But I will turn it over to Bob and if there was something you wanted to add ahead of it,
I would
or?
like to hear what you have to
Oh,
add
okay.
about this.
Yeah, many years ago, that, I think it's called Cape Cod National Golf Course over in East Harwich, went through Cape Cod Commission review. And there were a couple little older Cape Cod cottages on there. I think one of the houses was called the Rogers House. Generally, one of the ways you pick up buildings or properties from the inventory is by them being listed on Macris. Through some sort of strange glitch, that house was actually never listed on Macris, the Rogers House, even though it's being used and in pretty good condition. And Elaine and I finally tried to do some digging about why that was, and I guess at this point, the state isn't willing to list it on Macris, but gave us all the information that was provided to the Cape Cod Commission as part of the development of regional impact. I think at this point, you would have enough information to take that building and vote to put it on your inventory list,
Okay,
and probably should.
okay.
Yeah. Because the way I read the development of regional impact decision, because it wasn't listed on Macris, there's no further Cape Cod Commission jurisdiction if that building is proposed to be demolished or changed.
Okay.
But of course, you can have jurisdiction over it under your demolition delay bylaw.
Is this the one that's on my list that I couldn't find?
No, it's,
Oh, okay,
I
never
think
mind.
that's an additional building, outbuilding or something.
Well, because there's two for that address.
Right,
I think there were even 3 at the time,
right.
and 2 are kind of in active use. They might even be units. And one is, this Rogers House is probably, from what I hear, is like the best example, but it's not really being used for anything. And there have been like discussions in the past about demolishing it and not wanting to fix the roof and this, I mean, it,
Well, as I understand, and this was really before my time too, that they were using it for bathrooms,
mhm.
but they have since built bathrooms and they're not maintaining the building.
Yeah,
So it's just
I think that's
falling
inaccurate.
apart.
Yeah.
Is
At
this
this
Mrs.
point.
Rogers' old house, the one that used to have the antique shop
No, I don't know.
down in the port
I have no
next to
idea.
Butler's?
I have no idea.
There were a lot of Rogers over,
There's
and
a
that,
ton
of
that
Rogers.
Brewster in Orleans,
Yeah, everything Rogers Road, everything.
yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
that was a family. Okay, well, that's good, so I can include that, and I see Lane sent me all the information, a lot of historical stuff and description here.
So I think you could even like refer to that information and then just take a vote to put it on your inventory list.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's not in Macris, but is it on, it's not on our inventory list either?
No, I don't, Elaine tells me it's not.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Now, I think it would probably take more work to get the other buildings on, and I don't know what, it sounds like, who knows how much they've been changed at this point, and I don't think the owners are all that keen on having people come to the
No,
property.
they're not.
So I think at this point, you know enough about that Rogers house to be able to support putting it on the inventory list.
Okay, good, good.
So we can certainly add that to one of our
Yeah,
agenda items.
absolutely. Yeah, that's no problem at all. So, but as far as I did report to the CPC on our progress, and I can pass those out, what I've reported. So basically restated that, what we had applied for the CPA funding was updating the 100-year historical building list
Sure, thanks.
and documenting the clusters of the houses in our villages. And the big issue there is that while we had a lot of that in our list, it's never put into Macris. So when you look at Macris in a village area, there's just so much missing out of it. And then we had documenting other categories in Macris, and our thought was to do like a lot of the memorials that are around, and someone had done great research a few years ago, and it was a display at the community center of all that information, and that should be put in where it's not already. There are some there now. So as far as the 100-year, I have updated, or I have identified all the properties that need to be added, and that's when we would do the visual inspection before we add it to the 100-year list. So we'll do that and submit that to be added to the 100-year list spreadsheet. And that's a total of 58 properties that need to be added that weren't already on there. As far as the clusters and houses, Sarah Gorgeff has been so helpful in analyzing our database. But for instance, we have 20 properties that were done by Hale Architects, but for some reason were never submitted to Macris. And they have both the history, they have completed Form B. So we want to add those, but we also want to do all of Miranda's that she identified, which is another 250 buildings that did not get submitted because they don't have the historical narrative. So we want to use that, have those all completed by contracting that out, as well as some may be missing the architectural, or the architectural needs some work too. So that's going to be the real core of the thing, to get them in shape and submit them to Macris. So we would increase, we currently actually have 500 properties on Macris of different areas and things like that. A lot of areas and other things that are put in there, and some things that probably don't even exist anymore. It was done in the 60s and 70s. So anyways, we want to get more into Macris to identify them and assign, well, they're already assigned to a village, which we want to make sure so that we have a clear picture of each village. And Macris is already set up as villages, a good detail of each one, and then they'll point to the houses as we add them, so they'll be identified. Again, updating objects and areas, we had hoped to do more, but I don't think we're going to have sufficient money to work on that on this grant. I think we'll just key in on the properties that we've identified, the 250 plus. Plus, we have found some deficiencies on, Sarah found these in the Macris database that we got away without putting in architectural reviews. We've got good history, but no architectural. We're going to try to identify those and put those together with the submission for the consultant to complete. And we have the 34,500 to work with on that.
And one thing that Bob made clear to the CPC was that the work that he's done to date and the going out and taking a look was all something that the board was doing
Right.
to kind of save that money
Right.
for the work that we needed to pay for,
Right, that we
you
can
know.
practically do ourselves.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. Any other reports from commission members? Nope. I will report that Bob got kudos from the CPC, and they wished all of their reports had the detail that Bob's did, so that will tell you how much work he has done. So I thank you for that. Nothing else, I think, to report on my end. Bob took care of CPC, and I think we're good. Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
So there's a motion and a second. We'll take a roll call vote. Julie Eldridge,
Aye.
Lynn Zelisek,
Aye.
Brendan Lowney,
Aye.
Bob Doan,
Aye.
and the chair votes in the affirmative as well. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.